It's the second week of the photo contest. I asked participants to submit a photo of something sharp. So before I begin, I want you to go ahead and comment who you think will win. Contestant number 1, contestant number 2, contestant number 3, and contestant number 4. Again, the theme was something sharp. Go ahead and leave a comment on who you think will win this competition. I also want to thank last week's winner, Jessica, who won the $25 prize for her photo of the Meliconic bead. Normally, I have the categories of speech, which is subject, purpose, emotion, artistry, technicality, and story. But today we won't be judging the purpose or the emotion. So let's just jump right into it. The theme was to post a picture of something sharp. Tavia submitted this photo. Anytime I'm judging the subject, what I want to do is I look at the photo and I say, what do I want to look at? What is the subject in this photo? Well, it's obvious that she wants us to take a look at it looks like an aloe plant, and it is something that is sharp. It doesn't give a lot of context, but I can tell. I mean, it's obviously an aloe plant that's in a pot. It's an aloe plant in a garden, so it's outside. I can see that there's a lamppost back here. I can see there's a street. So I see another bush in the background. So the subject's clear. It's an aloe plant, right? So for the subject, I gave it a 3. I wouldn't have included this tree branch right here for a couple reasons, because it doesn't really add to the photo. If anything, it takes away from the subject, and it's a little bit distracting because it doesn't really highlight the aloe. So even if I were to crop it, again, I asked them to not crop these photos. Had I cropped it, as you can see, before and after, this is the after, and that was the before. So if I were to do it the other way, you can see that would be less distracting. So for the subject, I gave her a 3. For the artistry, I gave also a 3. That also had to do with the composition, just like I had talked about. I wouldn't have included that branch. And in fact, even if I went all the way in and cropped it in real tight, that right there would probably be a more compelling photo. You could still see it's an aloe plant. You can see that it is sharp. There's a little distracting element there. I mean, again, I asked them not to edit it, but if I were to edit it, I'd probably just kind of zap that little distracting element right there. It has a little condensation on it. And of course, this is right here. Even though it's part of the plant, it kind of separates it a little bit, but I would have taken that out as well. All right, so again, for artistry, I put 3. Now for technicality, I gave her a 2. And the reason is because none of this is actually in focus. That's rule number 1 of photography. You want to make sure your photo is in focus. I understand if you're trying to keep some bokeh or this blurriness for artistic effect, but it's not in focus. Assuming she took this with a cell phone camera, but if her hand were to move just a little bit, it's going to catch a small part of motion blur. And maybe I'm also think she may have zoomed in on this, just based on the bokeh that I see in the background. I'm assuming that she might have zoomed in on this. But again, also the lighting, it's outdoor lighting, but if you notice, the highlights are blown out right there. So although this looks like it's proper, the highlights, see this little white area right here? So if I were to reduce the highlights, it would be better if this was in RAW, but it's in JPEG. All right, so if I reduce the highlights, obviously you can see it looks like there's a little bit higher contrast. It looks sharper. Hey, but that's what happens. So if this is these are what's called highlights. So the bright white areas, that's the highlight. So if I took that down, I could take it all the way down. Provides a little bit more contrast to the subject. And if I want to increase the contrast, I'm not a fan of doing this, but it'll make the photo. It fakes clarity, right? Actually, there's a slider for clarity, but I don't like that look because that takes a little bit away from the subject. Story, I also gave it a 2. There's not much of a story here. Oh, by the way, I also wanted to talk about like the background. The background, green on green. I get that it's a garden, but it doesn't provide much contrast because then the subject actually blends into the background, and I start losing the focus of looking at the actual subject itself. I would rather have maybe the sidewalk appear behind it rather than the bush. So she got a score of 10. Moving on, we're going to talk about tomorrow's photo. Tomorrow's photo. Now, one thing I did like is her take on what is something sharp. She chose cheese, sharp cheddar cheese. The subject, it's very obvious. She wants me to look at the cheese, right? She says, "Look here, look at the cheese. It's dead center in the frame. It's very obvious she wants me to look at the cheese. The cheese looks good. I kind of want to take a bite out of it. It makes me feel hungry. So if we had judged on emotion, it does induce a little bit of hunger. So again, she got a 4 for the subject because it's very obvious what the subject needs to be. I would have given it a 5 if this slice right here wasn't curled up. That's a little distracting because I want to keep the repeating pattern of the other cheeses, but this one I just curled up, kind of distracted from the overall layout of the cheeses. But I do like that it looks very intentional. So I really appreciate the intentionality behind this. Artistry. Now, again, I want to reiterate that when I talk about artistry, it's not necessarily about, is it a beautiful piece of art? There are some things that you can discuss about art and you can break down. Like, for instance, composition. We talked about the rule of thirds in our last video. So if you haven't seen that video, make sure that you go find that on my YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe right now. But this composition is a little bit different because most trained photographers won't put something dead smack in the middle. But this composition is basically a circle. It's like, taking a piece of paper and taking a pen and just circling something. It says, look here, right? So when you circle something, it says, look here. So that's what she's done with this composition here, with the pepperonis in the background and with this in the foreground, with the crackers in the foreground. I appreciate. Oh, by the way, I also said, I have some notes here on the subject. The other reason why it wasn't a 5, there's some crumbs down here that bothered me. I mean, of course, in post, you can it's very easy to just like zap the crumbs, right? And it's gone. It will clean up. Again, I asked them not to edit the photo so I can kind of talk about it this way. But if you're trying to compose an image, then you can actually clean the plate. But that's why I gave it a 4 instead of a 5. But for the artistry, she did get a 5. If I haven't said before, I'm judging everything on a scale of 1 through 5 because I really just enjoyed the composition of this image. It's actually quite simple. And also foreground, middle ground, background. It's another thing I talk about. The background is the pepperoni and the plate. The foreground is the crackers, and the middle ground is the cheese. And we get that cheese is emphasized by the composition. It's in a circle. It wouldn't have worked if these crackers were stacked a different way. So, for instance, if these crackers were stacked parallel to the cheese, it wouldn't have worked the same. It wouldn't have drawn my eye as much to the cheese. So, artistry, 5. Technicality, I gave it a 4. Overall, it's a pleasing photo. I don't think the white balance was accurate. That's where you can actually set the... now, a lot of people will do this in post, which I'll show you. They'll take a photo and they'll kind of add a little bit more... Whoops, that's too much. So just the hair. So right about there is a little bit closer... Well, no. We get a little bit closer to the actual color of the plate of cheese and crackers. I'm assuming she was doing this indoors with incandescent lighting. So that's why, if you notice, it's a slight yellow tint to it. But overall, great job on that. Story, I gave it a 4. It's a simple story. It's just, crackers and cheese on a plate. And it goes with pepperoni. All those things work well together. It would be different if it had something fried rice. It wouldn't work. If I put fried rice on that plate, it would throw off the image. It just wouldn't make sense. So story, I gave it a 4. Overall, I gave it a score of 17 for Tamar. Now, this one is from Tree. Tree, I see what you're doing here, man. He said this was his father. I like the intentionality of this photo. I could tell he probably took some time to set this thing up. He asked his father to participate. I'm sorry, man, but I had to give this... the subject a 2. The reason is the assignment was to give me something sharp, and I think you chose scissors. when I look at this image, my eyes are not drawn to the scissors. It's actually drawn to him, right? He's looking dead in the camera, or he's looking at you, but his eyes are really compelling. It does tell a story, um, and there's some emotion here, but it's it's not about him. It should be about the scissors. Overall, I like the photo, but my eyes are naturally drawn to him. If I talk about the rule of thirds, the rule of thirds is that the subject should be in one of these intersecting lines. He's on this line right here, right? So he is abiding by the rule of thirds. So my eyes naturally are drawn to him, but it's not being drawn to the scissors. The scissors should have been the subject, and not your father. Unless your father's a sharp guy, then maybe that would have passed. But I gave the subject a 2 because again, where does my eye go? What am I looking at? Anytime I look at an image, it says, what does the photographer want me to look at? And I'm looking at your father. I'm not looking at the scissors. Artistry, though, I did give it a 4. I gave it a 4 because even if we take the scissors out of the equation, again, we're going by the rule of thirds. I like the composition. I like that it looks like you asked him to stand next to the mirror, so you kind of get this reflection. I probably would have scored higher. This looks like a shelf in the background, a bit of a distracting element. I would have taken that away or not composed it in the shot. So as you can see, this is the before, and that would be somewhat the after. But again, don't edit these photos. I'm just doing that to show an example. It'll be more difficult to crop in or crop that shot out, because once I start cropping, then it looks funny. So technicality, I gave it a 3. It looks like it was an indoor shot, and the lights were not that bright or not the proper color temperature. If I wanted to get a more accurate color, I would say that's a little bit more accurate. This would be too much, but I would say about there would be a little bit more accurate representation of what the true colors would be, as opposed to this, which tells me again that you're doing this in incandescent lighting. That's where it has that soft yellow tint. Anytime you have a photo like that, you just add a little bit more blue to get the colors a little bit more accurate. If I want to increase the clarity, you can do this on men. It's harder to do on women. Brings a little bit of the darkness out of that. Story, I gave it a 4. It's a man cutting hair, but there's a couple ways I would have improved this photo, because it doesn't make sense for someone to cut their hair looking at a cameraman. It does. He's cutting his hair looking off at a distance, and he has access to a mirror right here. So imagine if he's holding this with his right hand, or he's looking, if he's left-handed, but if he's looking into the mirror, that would make a little bit more sense. And if I wanted to draw my eye to the scissors, I could have him looking into the mirror, capture that reflection, and have him look at the scissors. And the story behind that would be like, maybe he's hesitating to cut his own hair. That could be a story in there, right? But that's a better way to improve on the composition, because right here it just doesn't make sense why he's looking this way instead of the mirror where he should be looking. If he's cutting his own hair, he should be looking into the mirror. And again, that would take my eyes off of his eyes, because that's really distracting. Overall, I gave a score of 13. And last but not least, Kumar. He submitted this literally 1 minute before the contest closed. So he put this at 10:59. Oh, for the subject, I gave him a 1. This is not sharp. It's not really sharp. And if it was a sharp cup, you'd cut your lip. And I have to make sure that people are abiding by the rules. For artistry, I picked 2. I do like the composition, even though it's centered. I always say, well, the thing is, if you're going to center an object or your subject, you want to make sure that some of these lines are more parallel. So for instance, I'll give you for instance. So if I did something like that, I would try to make some of these other lines behind it parallel, as opposed to that slight angle. That slight angle bothers me. Or if you're going to go to an extreme Dutch angle, go with that. Technicality, I picked the 2. Even though it looks like there's a lot of daylight, the colors seem off, right? Just a slight more touch, and we would have had a little bit more accurate representation of what the colors truly are. And for story, I gave it a 2. It's a cup of tea in a tea shop or a coffee shop. Uh, if this was the intended subject, and if that was what we had talked about doing today, the story would have had a lot more. Everything would have got a lot more points. But it all starts with the subject. And you got 7 points off of this. But again, look, even though there's ladies back here on the computer, that adds to the story of me being a shop in at a coffee shop or a tea shop. It's kind of like a Panera Bread almost, not Panera Bread or local. I'm sorry, local coffee shop. If you haven't figured out by now, the winner is Tamar. So congratulations, Tamar, with your shot of the sharp cheddar cheese. Make sure that you reach out to me and give me your information so I can give you the $25 prize. I'll be honest, I was almost, I put this out in the morning because I wanted to give people time to produce a photo. I didn't want them to just like go, just take a quick shot. And I said a top 5 because, again, I don't want people to just rush to this. I want people to be a little bit more intentional. But nobody posted until almost 11 hours later. I don't know how I'll handle these future competitions if I'll keep on going, but let me know what you think in the comment section, if I should continue doing these photo contests, what I should alter, what you like about it, what you don't like about it. I'm up for criticism because this is relatively new. I'll eventually, clean up before I get on camera. And if you notice, I'm experimenting with a new microphone. So if this audio is bad, I'll have to redo this thing again. But I don't want to because I don't have unlimited time. Anyway, thank you guys for coming out. Bye.